Good morning. Our speaker today is Dr. Matt Vasser. Our program is underwritten by an educational grant through OSU Medical Center graduate underscored through a graduate medical education. A disclosure statement has been signed and is on file at the GME office. Dr. Vasser's research focuses on making research better, improving the conduct and reporting of clinical research, and exploring the effects of bias on study outcomes. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles in some of the most prestigious journals in medicine, including JAMA, JAMA Internal Medicine, JAMA Oncology, JAMA Dermatology, JAMA ENT, Annals of Emergency Medicine, British Journals of Anesthesia, Annals of Oncology, and European Urology. Dr. Vasser's research has been featured in New York Times, Science, Nature, the BMJ, Reuters Health, and many other national news outlets. His publications have made the top 5% of all research outputs on all metrics numerous times. Dr. Vasser is firmly committed to the mentoring of the next generation of physicians and scientists. His unique and highly innovative approach to mentorship has resulted in over 300 student authorships on peer-reviewed publications and hundreds of conference presentations. 1/3 of his students have published in a top-ranked journal in a clinical specialty, and 66 have published in top-ranked clinical journal. Dr. Vasser's students have been awarded research grants from the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Dr. Vasser has also been awarded an AACAP Outstanding Mentor Award. Dr. Vasser focuses on the full development of the learner and trains them to write scientifically, submit manuscripts for publication, respond to reviewer comments, and work with media outlets following publication. This training has produced a generation of students who have performed numerous peer reviews for academic journals, served on Cochrane review teams, provided input for the revision of reporting guidelines, gave plenary sessions at national conferences, and led independent projects that have gone on to successful publication. Please welcome Dr. Matt Vasser.
Thank you, Sam. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Wonderful. Let me share my screen. Now, can you see my screen, Sam?
Yeah, I can see it.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come back to Grand Rounds and speak. I get to speak about something that I enjoy, and that's always a fun topic. So thank you for having me in Grand Rounds today. What I wanted to talk to you about today is an introduction to scientific publishing, some of the things that I think about, and some of the things that I think might help you as you move forward to thinking about publishing research. And so let's go ahead and start. So I guess the first question most people ask is why publish? And I think within medicine, there are many reasons for different groups to publish. I have medical students who are on this call, and for their applications for residency, there are reasons for publishing to look a bit different, to be more competitive, and some programs value medical students who have research backgrounds as they come into the residency application process. For residents, there are scholarly activity requirements to be met by programs, as well as fellowship opportunities. Fellowships sometimes value research. For faculty, clinical faculty, and attendings, for career advancement and other things, and to meet ACGME requirements. It's always good to understand research and publishing and to do so to stay atop of those requirements as well. So what should you publish? New and original results. Reviews are getting harder to publish. We'll talk about that in a minute. But publishing, it has the ability to really advance our understanding of medicine, of new therapies, and of new techniques and procedures to better health of patients. What you don't really want to publish are reports that don't really have a broad interest to readership, work that's really out of date. duplications of previous work are really hard to publish. And there's some arguments around whether that should be on this list or not. And then incorrect or unacceptable conclusions. So you want a good manuscript to present, and I hope to go into some of those details today. I like to talk about what the process looks like from the inside, from the journal editors and the peer reviewers standpoint. So editors and reviewers are the most precious resource of a journal, and they're people who do this on top of their normal jobs. So editors receive a small stipend for their editorial work they do, and reviewers, peer reviewers who review manuscripts do it for free, and take up their time to give you feedback on your manuscript. So it's with COVID-19 happening, we saw a huge backlog. It's like the world shifted, the scientific community shifted to COVID research, and everyone was doing it. And it caused a huge backlog in terms of peer review, with all the manuscripts going to all of these journals. And it became really difficult to find peer reviewers, to get quality peer reviews, and to get things out to publication. And so you saw backlogs, you saw very truncated peer review times, 48 hours sometimes for a peer reviewer to turn around a review, which probably isn't long enough to do a good job. And so then you started seeing retracted articles that went through an expedited process. So COVID really changed the landscape of this process for normal. And I think it's still suffering to some extent from that. But it's just good to know that the peer reviewers are doing it to try to make your research better and to try to give an unbiased perspective. And then the journal editors are there and busy and are doing a full-time job. So it's difficult for the journals in many cases that are smaller to accommodate quick times and things like that. So it takes some patience. So I like to show this slide because it does take a bit of patience with journals, especially with the smaller ones. I often get questions around how long does it take to get published? And so I put this slide up. You can see this slide is broken into short submission to acceptance times and longer ones. And you can see there's a lot of variability across the board. A short time frame is about 5 weeks, and that would account for probably a revision. And then longer ones can take up to 30 weeks plus. I've had articles under review for a year and a half, at which point I just pull it from the journal. And because sometimes they have difficulty finding qualified peer reviewers, sometimes they're inefficient, sometimes it's one person running the entire journal from their desk at their university. And so you can see there's just a lot of differences and variability in terms of publication speed. And so when you submit to a journal, it's good to know what their average speeds are, because there are some journals I just choose not to submit to because I've had such bad experiences with how long it took. So it's good to kind of know that. There's some metrics out there that help you understand how quickly a journal will usually expedite a process. I like to talk about impact factor too, because most people have heard about it. The journals all talk about what their impact factor is. And so I like to just go through, it's a very simple formula, but it's in essence, scientific research is often evaluated upon its ability to be cited by others. It shows that your work is relevant to the field and other people are citing your work. And so the impact factor takes into account all of the citations, which is the number of times articles published over a 2-year span are cited in journals. And then the denominator of that equation is the number of citable items within that journal. So you can see that some types of publications are not included in the denominator, but essentially you arrive at an equation, or a fraction, where the number of citations is in the numerator and the number of citable items is in the denominator. And if you divide that, you get a number. Now, what you'll see is that the higher, I think New England Journal of Medicine is probably in the 70s. I haven't looked recently, but they have a very high impact factor. As you move down, you start getting closer to 1. And then below 1, you start seeing some lower impact factor journals. So it's just it's a standardized metric that journals use and tout if they have high ones. So it's one of the more established journal ranking systems we have. And so if you see differences in that, it may help you determine like this is a really high impact factor journal. There are caveats. If you take cancer, for example, you'll find that the highest impact factor cancer journals are probably in the 50s or the 40s. And if you contrast that with the highest impact factor anesthesia journal, you'll see that that would be in the 10s. If you look at ENT, you'll see that the highest one is probably in the 3 to 5 range. So it's not, it varies by specialty and it varies by, so you can't just look at it across the board and say, oh, that's a high impact factor. It varies greatly by discipline. So I like to show this slide. So the x-axis shows the time after publication in years. And what you can see here is that this red curve line represents the citations of a study over its life cycle. So you can see that it reaches its half-life, the citation half-life, at about 6 years. So you're going to receive most of your citations within that first 6 years. And then following that, for the next several, you're going to receive the rest. So this shows you just about what to expect on a typical paper with respect to citations. Okay, so here are some tips about how to get your article published. Oftentimes, I get asked questions about should this move to publication, and these are some things I think about. You know, when you're publishing something, you're thinking about what is a readership going to want to read about, what are the editors looking for, and are the peer reviewers going to think that the study or the topic is worth publishing compared to other things that might go into the journal. So new and interesting always catches the eye, and is something that, so if you have something new and interesting, it's always a good thing. If it's currently a hot topic, that tends to publish well. Have you provided solutions to some difficult problems? And are you ready to publish at this point? If so, those are probably good indications that it's time to start thinking about publication. Journals have different forms of publications, and full articles are roughly 3,000 words within medicine, give or take. That varies by journal, but just as a rule of thumb, it's about 3,000 articles. These are kind of the gold standard, the best parts of the journal, like the centerpiece of the journal, are these types of studies. Also, a lot of journals are moving toward letters or rapid communications. I really like these because they are short and they're and you can submit them. It requires less writing. They're still citable. So if I have a smaller study, then I will often look at these types of communications because I think that I've had really good experiences with them. And those generally range from, say, 600 to 1,500 words. Review papers, these are very difficult. They're often invited. Journals will invite you to rewrite these. So review papers by themselves without being commissioned are difficult to publish, just because there's some questions about, did you select certain literature and omit other literature if it's not done in a systematic way? And so they're a bit harder to get published. And then there are other types of studies as well. But these are just the broad categories I would say that you might see broadly across the different journals that you might be interested in submitting to. You want to, as you select journals, it's important to think about the audience that might be reading your study. And I like to think about that in terms of, especially with the work we do, it kind of cross-cuts epidemiology with some of the clinical specialties. And so I always think about should I move it? Should I try for a rheumatology journal or should I try for an epidemiology journal? And sometimes I go different ways, just depending upon the topic. So you want to think about that. You also want to think about whether your research has an international focus versus a US focus, and you write differently and you think differently about studies like that. So there's some different considerations as you think about where you might want to publish your work. How do you select a journal? Well, this is the age-old question. It's difficult. There are so many journals out there these days. Last time I spoke on predatory publishing, and so my first tip would be stay away from predatory publishing. Don't do it. Really do your homework. If something looks, if a website doesn't look good, if you get an email from a journal in general, don't get excited. It's probably predatory publisher that's trying to solicit authors to submit something, and the emails always look really bad. There's always like really big giveaways in terms of the emails. So I would never, if I receive an email from a journal, I would never respond to it. I would never send something there. You can look at reference lists of some of the studies that you cited to see if there's a continuous theme there. Maybe there's a couple of journals that really stand out because they're publishing widely on that topic. You can also look at recent publications, which is something I do. Who's publishing on this topic? Okay, that seems like a good fit, perhaps. So maybe we should go there. And then ask yourself the following questions: is the journal peer reviewed? You can find that normally in the instruction on the journal's website. Who's the audience? What's the average time to acceptance or average time to print? And then what is the journal's impact factor? So those are all things you can think about. I also have another kind of website I'll show you on the next slide that is another resource that I go to. I'd encourage you to write down the website address, and if you're ever interested, this might be a helpful resource to help you decide. It's often considered unethical to submit the same paper to multiple journals at the same time. It's expected that you do one at a time. And keep in mind that a lot of these journal editors know each other within these disciplines, and so they have access to probably seeing if there are duplicate submissions going on, but it's really frowned upon because since peer review is so hard to come by, it's just a lot of processing and a lot of manpower if you're going to submit to several places at once and require all those people. So it's just something that is not good practice. I like to mention that. Okay, this is Jane. It's the journal author name estimator. Here's the website, jane.biosemantics.org. You can enter in a title or an abstract or keywords here, and you can select find journals. And I didn't do a fake one to show you what the results look like, but it does a relatively good job of coming up with other studies from that are published in different journals that might be similar to yours. And then it ranks the journals by similarity scores, and it might give you some really good pointers and give you some things to think about. It's not perfect. Sometimes it's way off, but a lot of times it gives you several good options. And I think it filters out some of the predatory journals, which is nice, although it's not perfect. So you might keep that in mind as a possibility. It's certainly something that I use on occasion when I'm trying to find a good journal. So what are the problems with getting papers published? This is one editor's perspective, so I put those in. I agree with some of these. I think the first one is a big thing: submission of papers which are clearly out of scope. The more informed you can be about journals and what they take and what they don't take, the better off you'll be and the less times you'll probably submit. We still get a fair number of desk rejections where the editor says this is a great study, but it's outside of the scope of what we publish. It's not a high enough priority. We're looking for this type of research. And so if you can do your due diligence, then it's really helpful. I've sometimes sent emails to the editor with asking if they would be interested in in reviewing an article, and I would send them the abstract. And sometimes that works. And some journals prefer that. Oftentimes I don't, it's just an extra step. And I found that it's not always that effective. You can have a very enthusiastic editor. And then when you submit it, you get a rejection very quickly, even if you do that. So that's kind of a hit and miss process. The second one, failure to format the paper. A lot of, the bigger journals have editorial staffs that check these things and will send them back to authors. So I get less concerned. I do try to do a good job of formatting, but if it's not perfect, I'm okay with that, because a lot of the journals now have the support to have editorial staff look at them. Inappropriate or no suggested reviewers. A lot of journals want you to suggest reviewers, and I've never understood what their rationale for that is. Oftentimes you submit names and those names never review your paper. And so I have a couple of different possibilities. One, I think, is that they may be trying to increase their peer review base and just get people into their system for other studies, not yours. And so that's a possibility. I often wonder if people would submit names of people that they know or know would likely give them a favorable review. And so I've always wondered what the rationale was for that. But inadequate response to reviewers, if you're given the opportunity to revise your paper based on peer review comments, not putting in much effort in the responses will get you rejected pretty quickly sometimes. And then you want good grammar, good English. So what makes a good manuscript? The first, and I agree with this completely, contains a clear, useful, and exciting scientific message. Clear, I think, is so important, and I spend a lot of time with my learners working on academic writing, and so I think that you just want to be, the way I look at it is pretend that you're a busy physician between patients and you have 5 minutes to look at some journal that came up on your desk and you read a part of something. It should be really easy and clear to read, and that's the way I see it. And so I will go through some things in a few slides along that line, but you want things to flow in a logical manner, make it super easy for the reader to follow. You want it formatted to best showcase the material. So is that with headers within the results sections? Is that with charts or tables? How can you really show those patterns of your results best? How can you make that easy and clear? And is it written in a style that transmits the message clearly? So again, a lot of focus on clarity. And okay, a word about words. This is not creative writing that you're doing. So you don't want to start with a poem. You don't want to, tell some kind of fictional story at the beginning. You want to really dive in and give the reader in the introduction just enough so that they understand the context for your study. And then you move into what your study was about. Journal space is precious, and that's how they see it. So journals want you to be as concise as possible. Take out extraneous words, like things like in order to. A lot of people write with that phrase, in order to. In order is never needed in that sentence. Journals will always strike it out. So it's just a good idea to do some of those things. Be as concise as possible. If clarity can be achieved in N words, never use N+1. This can be harder than you imagine it to be. You'll write your manuscript and it's 1,200 words over, and you're thinking, how am I going to condense this down by 1,200 words? So I also like to say use simple language whenever you can. Always use the smaller word, the easier word to say, the easier word to read, whenever you can. And when you're thinking about journal space in print journals, if one word has 7 letters and one word has 3, it takes up less room to type out 3 letters than 7. So I always think about those. The word I like to use versus utilize as an example. Use is a very easy word to read, to digest and understand. Utilize takes 3 syllables to say out loud. It's a longer word. It sounds more formal. A lot of people use it in academic writing. I see it all the time, but why would you use utilize when you could use and it's such an easier word. So, and there's lots of words like that, but I like to use this as an example. Another thing I see oftentimes in academic writing is people who make nominalizations, and that's simply taking a verb and making it into a noun. So here's an example: utilization of team-based learning in an inpatient setting, compared to using team-based learning in an inpatient setting. The second is much easier to read, and you don't need to do those verb changes to nouns. You see, if you start looking for these in papers that you read, you'll see a whole lot of this going on, and it's a practice I would steer away from. I think it clutters your ability to read and understand. It just takes longer for your brain to process, in my opinion. What makes a good manuscript? I always say this: it's all about the reader. And remember, the editors and reviewers are in this group. As an author, your job is to make the reader's job as easy as possible. So do the work for the reader. Don't make them reread passages because of a lack of clarity. We're all busy, and I don't like to have to reread something. I like to get it the first time and not have to go back and reread it. So when I see phrases embedded like this, in other words, that's just telling me they did such a bad job on the first sentence that they had to explain it in a second sentence. So rewrite those kinds of things so that it's clear on the first go, and you don't have to spend two sentences, a sentence, trying to explain a sentence that was so unclear that it took an extra sentence to explain it. Writing a good manuscript is not easy, so be prepared to work on it. It takes time. It does get a lot easier as you get more experienced, but it does take time to develop that skill. Let's talk about the general structure of a paper. MRAD is the most common form that you'll see in most medical journals. You'll have an introduction, a method section, results, and discussion. With a 3,000 word manuscript, I typically think about an intro being about 500 words, a discussion being about 1,000, and then the methods and results taking up the rest of that space. It's harder for me to say how long those sections should be. Our methods are pretty long, and sometimes they borderline 1,300 words or so. And our results are usually much shorter because the narrative to explain results doesn't take as much space. If you have figures and tables, you're just explaining the patterns you see within those figures and tables, and it doesn't usually require that many words to accomplish that. Then you'll have acknowledgements, references, and supplementary material. This is how I would recommend writing. Think about being out of order. The method section is easy to write first because if you write it as you go, then it becomes a stepwise process, and you always remember what you did along the way. So I always like to think about starting with the methods so that I know all of the steps and know what I did along the way. When you build your results, when you have data, it's always great to start thinking about the figures and tables you're going to place them into to present that data. And then after you have those figures and tables, it's really easy to go back and write the narrative that explains those figures and tables. After you write the results, it's easy to start thinking about the discussion and how you might, what implications came from those results, what do they mean within the context of the broader literature, and what do they mean to patient care, and what recommendations can you provide based upon those recommendations? Where does the field need to go? How has your study informed a new line of research, and those kinds of things. And then you can come back and write the conclusions and the introduction at the end. And then of course, write your abstract last because it's a summary of the work that you did. And then you have a really clear indication about what needs to go in each part of the abstract. Titling, I think about titling. What I think about is PubMed and other indexing, other databases. You want someone to type in the right search terms and bring back, retrieve your study. And so what are the things that you need to do to get that to happen? Because title searches can be performed in those databases. So oftentimes you want shorter titles. Some people like catchy ones, the fun ones. There was a research group that rivaled another one, and who could put Bob Dylan lyrics in their titles, and they had this big competition to see who could get the most publications with Bob Dylan titles. So some people like to be fun, and I don't mind those either. Sometimes they're catchy and fun to read, but sometimes it's a turnoff to certain people. So keep that in mind. Technical jargon and abbreviations are not good in titles. Always discuss that with your co-authors and get them on board. If you want to put Bob Dylan lyrics in your title, it may not go over well with your co-authors. So always brainstorm with them about good titles. The abstract should be standalone. I like to really hit on the abstract hard because it is a very important component of research writing, and it's something that most people do at the last minute, right before they're submitting, and they don't put much thought or effort into it. But it's really a reflection of the work that you've done, and it needs to be accurate, and it needs to contain all the information it needs. And it's difficult because journals give you requirements regarding how many words you can place into an abstract. And so it's a challenge to write a good one, but I like to think sometimes you don't have access to the full paper, you don't have time to read it. And the only thing that you read is the abstract. And it's the one thing that someone might read of your paper, and they take away something from it. There have been studies looking at, do clinicians use abstracts alone in clinical decision making? And they found that that's, some people use abstracts to guide their understanding of research and whether or not this therapy should be applied to their patients. Keywords are something you'll be asked to do and provide, usually 5 or 7. That's again an indexing thing. If you want someone to retrieve your study from a search, what are those words that you need to give the journal so that they're retrieving, so that when they're typing them in. So it just takes some brainstorming. You can look at other studies on a similar topic and get their ideas as well. And then acknowledgements, if people have played a part in your study but haven't probably been elevated to the level of an author, then you can acknowledge them. It's just a nice thing to do. So here's some examples of people who might be recognized in the acknowledgement section. References. I'm giving a plug for PaperPile here right now, and they're not paying me for this, but I've looked at lots of different reference managers, and to me, it's a very easy one. I think my students that are on this call would agree with me on that. And it just makes things real easy. And you can actually just type the journal's name into the citation manager, and it will reformat all of your citations for you to the right journal specifications. I like to think about 30 references for an article. So I think about 10 for the intro. I think about a bulk of them for the discussion. And then you might have a few in the method section where you've made decisions about your methodology based upon previous studies. So that's just kind of a rule of thumb. I just like to give that because people don't know how many references, and that's certainly not a hard, fast thing. Sometimes an intro may take more or less than that, but I just like to think in general terms, that's a good working number to me. You don't need to cite everything, but you need to cite the most critical things. There's self-citation is citing yourself from your previous works. And that's something that you want to do because it informs the audience about what you've done in the past, but it can also inflate your metrics. And so some people don't think it's a good practice to oversight yourself. And then I'll talk about the cover letter. I think I'm about out of time. You also will submit a cover letter along with your article, and this gives you a chance to sell your paper. And a lot of people just use a standard one that they'd written that's generic, and they don't really change much from one to the next. I do that quite often myself, but I think there is an argument to be made about tailoring the cover letter to the journal and to really selling your manuscript. What value does it add to the journal? What is it about? What are the big results? Like, why should this editor want to send your paper on to peer review? And so it's not going to disqualify you from getting published or not, probably, but it might convince the editor to advance your manuscript over others. So if you want to take some time to develop a good cover letter, you can certainly do that. I think it's good practice. It's not often something that I've done. And then another thing I've started seeing is people putting their letters on letterhead, university letterhead. So that's something we've been doing more often now. Let's see. I've already talked about that. I want to stay true to time, and I'm at 7:36. I believe that's the gist of my long presentation. I over prepared, but I think that around 7:30 is my cut point. So if that's true, I'm happy to take questions. All right, I don't believe I have any questions. So in that case, I appreciate your time today. It's nice to always be with you all in Grand Rounds and see so many people that I know sitting in the audience. And so thank you for your time, and I hope that you learned something. I'm always happy to field questions about publishing as best I can. Any advice while submitting case studies? That's a great question, Rashad, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit. Case studies are very popular because they, because you get an interesting case in the clinic or in the hospital, and it's some kind of anomaly and something that hasn't been really seen much in medicine. And journals have you need to look at look at the journals submission guidelines. Remember, I showed you the various types of articles that they publish. You need to see whether or not the journal will publish case reports or case series, because what I'm seeing across some disciplines is they're moving away from publishing case studies or case series, and so they can be difficult to publish. And so I would be sure to look and see whether the journals in your field publish them or not. And that can vary by discipline probably. So I would first look and see within your specialty, do the top journals take them or not? If they don't, there are case report journals that exist now. I wish I could tell you their names, and they tend to be broad, and they take case reports from any area of medicine. And so I think that would be a reasonable option if the journals within your discipline don't accept them, but they are getting harder to publish. And just with journal space, you'll see some journals writing editorials about we're no longer accepting case reports. So, oh, thank you, Lisa. 7:45. Okay, great. So I think that is my advice for case reports. Just do your homework before, and know kind of where you want to go. But if the journals within your discipline don't take them very often, then I would go probably to one of the case report journals, and there's several of them that take them. And then of course we have, the OSU medical proceedings. There's another Oklahoma Medical Association journal. I'm having word finding issues with its name, and I believe they take case reports too. So there are also some more regional options that might publish. So I think there's a home for your work. You need to do some homework on the front end when it's something like a case study to find the right journal for it. How does the cover page differ from the abstract? The cover letter is a letter that might contain key findings of your study, but it would also include things like why we think your journal is the right journal for this study. It would include things like all authors have reported their financial conflicts of interest. All authors have been involved in the work and have met authorship criteria. it also includes those types of details in the letter. And you can, if you were to Google search cover letter for a research study, you're going to see lots of good examples that you can certainly use and pull from, but they tend to cover like those basic things, like that we've met certain standards, that this article is not under review elsewhere at the current time. I've also seen some cases in which you can say this article was previously submitted to JAMA Dermatology. It was rejected. We've appended the reviewer's feedback and we've improved the manuscript based on that feedback for this revised version. So I've seen some journals suggest that. I don't know what I think about that. I don't know if it's a good practice or if that's or if that is if you say we've been rejected 7 times, if the journal is going to have a preconceived idea about your study just not being very well done, if it's been rejected by 7 other journals. So I don't know what I think about that. You're certainly not obligated to provide that information. And then the abstract is the actual summary of your study itself. So that has an introduction in a sentence or 2, a methods in a sentence or 2, results in a couple of sentences, and then like a line or 2 for the discussion. So you're taking everything in your study and you're condensing it into, say, 250 words. So that's the difference between the cover letter and the abstract. What other questions can I answer? It looks like I have some time. I guess I'll say this to you, that our library has resources available to also help you find journals, and there is a resource called PubsHub, PubsHub, that our library has access to and subscribes to, and it's a really good resource for finding journals and finding conferences to submit your work to, and it's really nice because it actually I think it scrapes the content from all the different journal websites and puts it all into one place. And so it's just a really nice reference. And it has metrics in it, like how long does it take for an article submitted there to get published. So I don't know if it's always accurate, but it's a good resource. Again, it's called PubsHub, PubsHub. And I'm sure the library staff could direct you to that resource on the internet. On their website if you want to get access to it. But I found it to be a really helpful thing, and I'm appreciative that the library continues to invest in that resource. I'll also say that if you're interested in learning more about writing, scientific writing, there is a really good free online course that's from Stanford University, and it's called Scientific Writing or Writing for the Sciences, something like that. If you Google search that word, Stanford Writing Course, it'll come up, and it's you can do it at your own pace. But I found it to really have a lot of good information about scientific writing and how to write well. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can always improve your skills by some of those online resources, which I found to be really helpful. I make my students all do that course as part of my research team. So. Asking for a few case report journals. I would honestly have to perform a Google search. I think there's one called the International Journal of Case Reports. I think there's one called the Journal of Case Reports. I think there's one specific to surgery, like the maybe International Journal of Surgical Case Reports or something like that. I don't do a whole lot of work in that space. So I can say this though, if you're interested in writing a case report, there is a reporting guideline called CARE, C-A-R-E. So if you were to Google search CARE case report guideline, if you were to Google those words, it'll come up. And it's a really good resource to guide you in how you should write a case report. And it was developed by a worldwide group of experts some years ago. And I like to always offer that as guidance. It will help you think about what you should present and what you should talk about, and the importance of presenting that information within the manuscript as you write it. So if you're writing a case report, I would highly recommend the CARE guideline. Yes, it is CARE. Are there any other questions that you all have with respect to research? If anyone is doing a chart review or a medical record review as part of their scholarly activity requirements, I've actually published a piece many years ago on good practice for doing those types of studies, and I published it open access, so it's free to anyone. And I actually wrote it a long time ago because I was working with residents on those types of studies, and I thought it would just be really easy to give some guidance that they could follow and read about in their own time. And so if you're interested in that, I can get that reference out to you too. So if you're doing a case report, I'm going to put my email in the chat because someone's asking how to email me. That's how you can reach out to me. This was my at that email address. All right, are there any other questions? Okay, I see no other questions. Do I give this back to Lisa or Dr. Alexopoulos?
Dr. Vassar, thank you once again for putting together and presenting a fabulous presentation. We look forward to having you back yearly if your schedule allows. So thanks again for that great information and synopsis on publishing.
It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy this. So thank you for having me.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.